Then, having covered their own history, the British came to India and a new field of inquiry emerged, known as Orientalism. That is the study of the East, its civilization, its past, its value systems, its religion, philosophy, culture, etc. A subset of Orientalism was Indology, that is the study of India. Now, these Orientalists or Indologists, beginning from the second half of the 18th century onwards, that is 1770s, 1780s onwards, they started to study Indian history along the same lines as they had studied their own history. So what had they relied upon to study their own history? Which kind of source? Literary source. तो इंडियन हिस्ट्री को स्टडी करने के लिए किसके ऊपर रिलाई करेंगे? Literary sources. तो they relied on literary sources to study the Indian past. ठीक है? And what was their analysis in the end? Do Indians possess the same kind of literature which emphasizes chronology, authorship and critical causation when dealing with history? और इंडिया में हिस्ट्री को रिलीजियस या स्पिरिचुअल लेंस के थ्रू देखा जाता है, रिलीजियस या स्पिरिचुअल लेंस के थ्रू देखा जाता है. तो based on these literary sources, they concluded that Indian society was spiritual and ahistorical. The Indian literary tradition, instead of emphasizing chronology, authorship and critical causation, it favored mythology, spiritualism, genealogy, and salvation. तो बताओ, author of the Vedas, can we say for sure? कहीं पे वेद व्यास को क्लेम किया जाता है, कहीं पे किसी और कोई ऋषि मुनि एटसेट्रा, दे आर क्लेम्ड. Author of the Puranas, the gods themselves, that these are Puranic tales. इतने पुराने हैं that we have lost all historical memory of them. They are part and parcel of the fabric of very Indian life, right? Authorship weak है. Is change explained on a rational basis or on a mythological basis? Mythological basis. Obviously, these are tales associated with gods and goddesses, legendary heroes, their miracles, their fights, their conquest of evil, right? Conquest over evil. तो ये लेंस दिखाया जा रहा है. The absorption of this kind of knowledge, what is the ultimate objective? Is it to learn valuable lessons from the past so that you do not repeat the mistakes made by previous generations of human beings? Or is it spiritual elevation and realization of salvation? salvation, spiritual elevation, right? Moral improvement है, realization of the four purusharthas, धर्म, अर्थ, काम, मोक्ष, etc. तो ऐसे में would it be correct to say that these Indian sources lacked any source of history, and therefore, since Indian intellectuals were not interested in history, Indian society was ahistorical or not? ऐसा बोलना ठीक होगा या नहीं होगा? बिल्कुल ठीक होगा. In fact, this is what the foreign scholars claimed. And main focus किसके ऊपर है? On spiritual salvation, moral upliftment, spiritual nourishment, etc. These kinds of things, right? Spiritual well-being के ऊपर है. So it was spiritual and ahistorical. And the ultimate conclusion that they drew was that Indians lacked a sense of history. यहां तक की कहानी समझ में आई है? कौन बोल रहा है ऐसा? The colonial scholars, early colonial scholars, orientalists or indologists. Should we pursue this line of thinking and not study the ancient Indian texts as a valuable source of history, or do we still need to use them? We still need to use them. Therefore, we must justify their use also. We don't need to do it. An eminent historian has already done it for us. So, who is the loudest voice over here? Romila Thapar. Romila Thapar has given a strong rebuttal to the Indologist Orientalist critique of the Indian history writing tradition. The first thing she says, who died and gave you the right to decide what is history and what is not history? Okay? So she says that the colonial dismissal of ancient India's historical consciousness is Eurocentric. ठीक है? So that means that simply because ancient Indians did not have the identical type of literature that the Western scholars were producing does not mean that they did not have their own sense of history. It is just that ancient Indians had their own unique sense of history, which was distinct from the Western historical tradition. Clear? So she said that European literary tradition is not synonymous with historical consciousness. समझ में आया इतना? Secondly, she said that a sense of history is not contingent about its emphasis on chronology, authorship, or critical causation alone. Rather, इसके ingredients क्या हैं? An awareness of time, change, and causation. Did ancient Indians have any conception of time? How did they conceive time? As a circular process or as a linear process? Both circular as well as linear. So if you look at the Puranas, they talk about manvantras, sargas, pratisargas, yugas, etc. So 4 yugas, the universe ends, another cycle begins. But within those 4 yugas, you need to go from one yuga to the other, na? And it consists of several thousands of years. So both linear as well as cyclical understanding of time Indians had. Then the process of change. Did ancient Indians have this consciousness that over time the conditions change, the realities transform, political systems change, the degree of virtue in the universe, the degree of vice in the universe, that changes? Yes, Sat Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapar Yuga, Kal Yuga, etc. What is all of this? भाई सतयुग में मोरालिटी टॉप पे है, बाय द कलयुग it is going to decline. If this is not an awareness of change, then what is an awareness of change was her argument. ठीक है? And causation. Now, not all texts may emphasize only on material causation. They may try to envelop material changes as mythological changes. This does not mean that they did not have awareness of material changes. Rather, they chose to envelop it, to present it in mythological terms because they were trying to serve a different purpose. But that does not mean that they thought that things happen spontaneously. There has to be an impetus for making change. ठीक है? तो ये चीजें होनी चाहिए. And she said that Indian literary tradition had all these qualities and then some to spare. ठीक है? तो the Indian literary tradition possessed all these qualities. This is her second counter argument. समझ में आया इतना? Thirdly, she says that the original Orientalist scholars or the colonial scholars did not look at all available literary sources. They looked at only a small portion of those literary sources. They dealt with primarily what kinds of works? Foreign works or indigenous works? To learn about India, will they listen to some foreigner or will they listen to Indians? हिंदुस्तान की कहानी हिंदुस्तानियों की जुबानी. तो they looked at Indian works, they ignored foreign works. Secondly, to understand the Indian culture, society, value system, past, polity, what did they rely on? On religious sources or on secular sources primarily? Religious sources. Works such as the Vedas, Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the epics, Purans, etc. That is what they consulted. They did not even consult the works of other religious doctrines such as Buddhism or Jainism. केवल ब्राह्मणिकल sources को इन्होंने consult किया. ठीक है? तो are they going to get a complete picture of the Indian past or only a fragmentary picture? Fragmentary picture. So they were not able to take into account the large variety present within the Indian literary tradition. So the colonial scholars ignored a large portion of the Indian intellectual tradition. Thus giving a distorted interpretation about the Indian historical consciousness. Fourthly, she made the argument that had the colonial survey of ancient Indian literature been an exhaustive one, तो एक realization dawn करता that in India history is present, it is part of the fabric of all literary traditions. It is just that in some traditions it is explicit while in others it is implicit. कहीं पे छुपा हुआ है, embedded है, और कहीं पे सामने दिखता है, externalized है. ठीक है, तो she made the distinction between embedded histories and externalized histories. तो बताओ, एक लाइन में अगर समझाना हो कि व्हाट इज द डिफरेंस बिटवीन एम्बेडेड एंड एक्सटर्नलाइज्ड हिस्ट्री, तो नाम से ही थोड़ा थोड़ा आइडिया लग रहा होगा, बताओ जरा. एम्बेडेड में हाँ लेटेंट इन नेचर, मतलब को दिखता नहीं है, होता है लेकिन दिखता नहीं है. एंड एक्सटर्नलाइज्ड एक्सप्लिसिट होता है, प्रत्यक्ष होता है, उसका मेन पर्पस ही हिस्टोरिकल रिकॉर्ड को मेंटेन करना, प्रिजर्व करना होता है. एम्बेडेड हिस्ट्री में जो हिस्टोरिकल कंटेंट है दैट इज नॉट एट द फोरफ्रंट, दैट इज enmeshed into other narratives, maybe some mythology, maybe some cosmology, maybe some moral education, maybe some legendary tale, etc. ठीक है, तो embedded history is one in which the historical content is embedded within a genealogical, mythological, moral, or spiritual framework. And externalized history is one which emphasizes primarily on preservation of the historical record. Now, can you give certain examples of embedded histories in India, in Indian literary tradition, जहां पे उसका मेन पर्पस पास्ट को प्रिजर्व करना नहीं है या फिर चेंज को एक्सप्लेन करना नहीं है, rather it is to legitimize the genealogy of kings, the dynastic rule of kings, establish a social order, give a cosmological moral message, give spiritual instruction. And उसी में बीच बीच में some king has been mentioned, the name of some state has been mentioned, the name of some city has been mentioned, some region has been mentioned, some war has been mentioned. तो ऐसे वर्क्स के कौन से होंगे? हाँ, जो महाभारत, रामायण, पुराण, वेदास, एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा. ठीक है, तो वेदास, पुराण, epics, then even secular literary works, the ancient Indian dramas, plays, poetic works, they were not actually works of history ना, तो दूसरा literary works थे, तो within them historical content we can glean from it. तो ancient literary works, further साइंटिफिक मैनुअल्स, मेडिकल मैनुअल्स, तो वहां पे भी some authors are going to be named, some sages are going to be named, some rivers are going to be named, some plants are going to be named, etc. These kinds of things. So professional manuals, law books, etc., etc. मतलब large variety of such works you will find out. ठीक है? And externalized history, can you give some examples? Sang, when he came to India during the reign of which ruler in North India? Harshvardhan, na? So he mentioned the presence of detailed royal chronicles maintained by each and every kingdom in India. उसके लिए एक पर्टिकुलर नाम तक यूज किया था इसने, known as निलोक्तु. ठीक है? तो these royal chronicles are what? They are in fact a highly detailed catalogued version of events that unfolded at the royal court, the policies adopted by the ruler, taxes imposed by him, wars prosecuted by him, regions won and lost by him, judgments passed by him, etc. These kinds of things. So royal chronicles हो जाएंगे इसमें. और anything else? These rulers left behind their own epigraphic records also, inscriptions. So they are a very good source of externalized history. What else? Anything else? And bhai, there was a particular genre of literature, or rather I should say an oral tradition that was dedicated to what? The glorification of the great exploits of kings. तो जो वीर गाथास होती हैं, bardic narratives, right? So those kinds of things which are carried on by groups, professional groups such as Suits, Magads, Pauranikas, Kathakars, Bhat, Charans, etc. Right? So these bardic narratives were also present. Okay? Now, what was the problem? इन दोनों में से ज्यादा विजिबल एंड ज्यादा डोमिनेंट कौन सा वाला फॉर्म ऑफ लिटरेचर था? एम्बेडेड हिस्ट्री वाला या एक्सटर्नलाइज हिस्ट्री वाला? एम्बेडेड हिस्ट्री वाला. लेकिन यहाँ पे हिस्ट्री क्या फोर फ्रंट मेन फोकस में है, और इज इट इन द बैकग्राउंड ब्लर्ड? इट इज इन द बैकग्राउंड, इट इज ब्लर्ड. जो अर्ली ओरिएंटलिस्ट स्कॉलर्स हैं, which of these did they consider? Both of these or exclusively embedded histories? Exclusively embedded history. ठीक है? So while this was the dominant one and highly visible form of the Indian literary tradition, this was the non-dominant and I won't say invisible, visible to tha, but it was deliberately ignored by the colonial scholars, neglected by them. ठीक है? तो had they taken both into account, would they have come to the conclusion that Indians did not have any sense of history? नहीं कंक्लूड कर सकते थे. एक तो दे रिलाइड ओनली ऑन दिस, एंड इसका भी इन्होंने सही इंटरप्रिटेशन दिया नहीं दिया, बिकॉज दे डिड नॉट फील दैट इसमें कोई हिस्टोरिकल कंटेंट था. दे सिंपली felt that it was ahistorical, but here we know that it is embedded history. They simply had to look for it. ठीक है? एंड तो यहाँ पे रोमिला थापर ने क्या क्या बोला है कि एक तो किसी की अम्मा नहीं मरी और वसीयतनामे में अंग्रेजों को बोल के चले गए कि यू हैव टू डिसाइड व्हाट इज हिस्ट्री, व्हाट इज नॉट हिस्ट्री. देयर इज अ वेरी यूरोसेंट्रिक व्यू ऑफ द पास्ट. दैट इज वन थिंग. सेकेंडली, दैट जो सेंस ऑफ हिस्ट्री है, द यूरोपियंस डोंट हैव अ मोनोपोली ऑन इट, एंड देयरफॉर सेंस ऑफ हिस्ट्री के और पैरामीटर्स हैं which should be taken into consideration. यूरोपियन स्कॉलर्स ने क्या 3 पैरामीटर्स दिए थे? क्रोनोलॉजी, ऑथरशिप एंड क्रिटिकल कॉजेशन. यहाँ पे क्या है? अवेयरनेस ऑफ टाइम, चेंज एंड causation. Awareness of time, awareness of change, awareness of causation. And Indian literary tradition possessed all these qualities, so they qualify. Thirdly, they ignored a large portion of the Indian intellectual tradition. They completely ignored the externalized forms of history, focused only on religious sources, and even there they did not realize that they consist of embedded historical content. Okay, so the picture that they created of the ancient Indian historical sense was a distorted and flawed one. In reality, Indian historical consciousness it was the product of what? जैसे यूरोपियन हिस्टोरिकल कॉन्शियसनेस वाज अ प्रोडक्ट ऑफ the European historical context, their social dynamics, their political pressures, their economic priorities, their cultural objectives. वैसे ही जो इंडियन हिस्टोरिकल कॉन्शियसनेस है वो भी क्या यूरोपियन कॉन्टेक्स्ट के थ्रू इन्फॉर्म होगा और विल इट बी इन्फॉर्म बाय द इंडिजिनस कॉन्टेक्स्ट. इंडिजिनस कॉन्टेक्स्ट प्रोडक्ट ऑफ द इंडियन historical context. Social, political, economic, and cultural needs. And thus, is it fair to expect it to be identical to the Western historical consciousness? No. Thus, it is distinct from the Western historical consciousness and deeply Indian. Does that mean that it was somewhat less than the Western historical consciousness? No, it is equally valuable, equally valid. It is just that it is different. उनके जैसा नहीं है, अलग है, तो वो ऑब्वियसली देखेंगे तो क्या बोलेंगे? That it is inferior. Clear? So it is different from the Western historical consciousness. And इसके characteristics क्या क्या हैं? That it is genealogical, mythological, cosmological, and instructive. So that means through the medium of historical writing or through the medium of writing, through the medium of literature, the ancient Indian intellectuals were trying to validate genealogy, thus legitimize rule, legitimize power. They were trying to create a moral framework for society, maintaining social order. They were trying to, you can say, hook the Indian cultural universe into a wider cosmology, right? Thus bringing cosmological insurance and stability to the Indian civilization. And it was also instructive what to do, what not to do. Clear hai? Informed by which intellectual priority? To maximize the 4 Purusharthas. What are these? Dharma, अर्थ, काम एंड मोक्ष. ठीक है. So she has said that it is distinct. The Indian historical consciousness is distinct from the Western historical consciousness. It is that does not mean it is any less than the Western historical consciousness. Indian intellectuals were trying to pursue their own priorities, the four Purusharthas, and thus the Indian historical tradition had these qualities. It was genealogical, mythological, cosmological, and instructive. And finally, ये जो colonial interpretation था, that Indians lacked a sense of history, was it a product of objective history writing, of objective analysis, or did they have a larger design behind this? कोई दूसरा पर्पस सर्व करना चाह रहे थे. What were they trying to do? They were ultimately trying to justify colonial rule. So by showing Indians as overtly spiritual, ahistorical, they were trying to show Indians as irrational, thus undeserving of rule. And if India में real progress लाना है, तो what would be required? The application of rational morality is going to be required. Are Indians capable of that? No. Indians had 2500 years before this. They did not do anything. Now it is the turn of the British to introduce these things. Okay? So she also challenged the colonial interpretation on the basis that the colonial interpretation of the Indian historical consciousness was not objective. Rather, it was biased and heavily motivated by their design to justify colonial rule in India. Clear?